Hi guys, what's up? I hope everybody is doing good. So I'm back with this video on the suggested answers for audit and assurance paper. And as usual, if you want to pull out the copy of this, the link is in the description. You can download the PDF from there. Now let's get started by seeing what questions and answers have come here. I have found it a very simple paper, nothing much to complicate. Again, these sort of things are done for an understanding, and also it will be insightful for somebody writing the future attempts on just knowing how questions are being asked and how you are supposed to write the answers. So, and if things have not gone the way you wanted to, there is nothing to be disappointed about. A question here and there might not really be a problem. After I uploaded the EIS SM, if you haven't seen that, that's a previous video. You can go and see that. Many of them have sent texts or message saying that I didn't write the answer that way. Will I get marks? So this is one of the reasons why I don't want to do these sort of videos, because people take it too personally and then they'll be feeling bad that I wrote this answer wrong. And so just take it easy. If things go really out of your hands and there is nothing that you can do, you've already written the exam, right? So you can't go back and change it. But of course, it's good for you to know, and also for all the upcoming exam aspirants, it is always good. So suggested answers are not just meant only for those people who've written the previous attempt. It's always good for the ones who are writing further to see what sort of questions are being asked, just to reassure that there's a simple fact that I keep telling: all the questions will come from the book only. Many people have their own thoughts saying that where is it? It's only that you have to go and find it. So let's start the exercise. We will start with our true or false questions as usual. True or false been very simple here. Many people have told me many stories saying that most number of times many of them are incorrect and only few are correct. So again, it happened to be like that, but again, like I said, I don't suggest you guys to do all such what do you say, funny analytical procedures. Last three times I've seen many incorrects are there. So anyway, let's not dwell into that. So starting with that, you have your safe spot of 14 marks, always easy to pick up. So starting with the first one, it's a straight arrow, 2 mark gifted to you if you just know what exactly misstatements are. You know the definition of a misstatement, difference between what is required versus what is reported. If both are same, it's called properly stated. If they're not same, where there is a difference, so I think you can clearly see it there. It's the okay, let's read the question first place. Misstatements are always because of fraud. So I think they're making a very pinpointed statement saying that it's always because of fraud and all. And I think there itself you will be able to find the answer as saying it incorrect, because we have two reasons that it can also be unintentional from the point of view of an error. And you know the definition of misstatement as I was just talking about. Different between amount, classification, presentation or disclosure of a reported versus what is required. If what is reported and what is required are same, then you don't have to really worry about this. But where you see that what is reported is different from what is required, is it because of a negligence that there is a misstatement like that, or is it intentional? So it could be both unintentional and intentional, and therefore misstatements can arise even because of errors. But since they said it's always, now many people what they would have done is write one line in the explanation saying that misstatements not only occur because of fraud but also because of error, and expect them to give what is a misstatement. It's always important for you to explain. They're giving you 2 marks, not to just point out what is correct or incorrect. Answer with the reasons. You see the heading, state with reason. So obviously you have to dwell a little deeper, explain what is the main context in this, the misstatement. See, because these 14 marks, there is a huge probability that you can get 14 out of 14 if you know things well. And if you have done MCQs well to a bit, I'm just normally going by what do I say, 80% accuracy. Even if you are 80% accurate of those 30 marks, you're still getting 24, 25 there. Plus, if you are properly prepared and you're doing well, let's even budget anywhere between 10 to 12 here. Even if 5 go absolutely right, you get 10 to 12. You're in a very sweet spot, right? Because you're already ensured yourself 35 to 36 marks, and rest of the paper is still there for 56 marks. Now even if you are going by 50% accuracy in that, that is coming to almost 28 marks. Okay, So with this 36, that too I gave a little leeway for you in MCQs. We left 4 5 marks. Here I said that apart from choice you can still go wrong with the two. So I only budgeted 35 marks from both these, and I'm taking only 28 marks of the other 56. That in the worst of the cases. If you're writing the answers well, you can even score more. So you've seen it. How scoring 60 has become very very easy thanks to MCQs and of course our true or false. So this is one such paper where unless you are messing up things badly, that too your fundamentals of the concepts are very bad, I mean, there is no scope for you falling below 40, at least in today's times. Now, back then, crossing 40 was like, yeah, because you had write 100 marks of answers, definitely there was a thing. And of course, only 14 marks of true or false were there. I'm not saying no. But yeah, back then it was a serious challenge, right? 86 marks of answers and then score very high. But like I said, 35 there, even 25 here out of the balance 56 is still letting you reach that 60 marks. But one point that I always tell, if you are capable of getting 35 in that lot, you will be capable of getting good marks here also. So recent times the benchmarks have been changed. I've already put one more video. I will leave the link in description here. A student has scored 86 marks. The link is already there in the description, so you can go and see that video as well. Not just showing you the suggested answers, I'm showing you the answers real time. So check out that and it will give you an idea of how the paper is being evaluated as well. Chalo, let's move on now with the second question. The first auditor or auditors of a multi-state cooperative society. Now they haven't asked any questions from multi-state cooperative societies. They've asked you true or false. It says shall be appointed in the AGM. First auditors in multi-state cooperative societies are more like the company story only. In fact, they are appointed by the board. So it's a classic case, whether you know it or not know it. If you know it, you will get these marks. If you don't, then you will do a art of guesswork, which is again not going to really work. Then the third one is a favorite definition for many, assertions. You might have spent a lot of time in the beginning understanding what assertions are. So the question is also in that manner. Let's get this right. Assertions refer to representations made by auditor is what is being told in the question, and I think all of you very well know it, that assertions are representations made by the management and which are either explicit or otherwise that are embodied into the financial statements. So they should be put up into the financial statements, and financial statements are the responsibility of management. So I think that's a very simple straight arrow. All you need to do is write the definition of assertion clearly, which is what is given there. So you will get your 2 marks. Moving on, yeah, there is a very thin difference between advocacy threats and intimidation threats to an auditor while performing his duty. Now, advocacy threats and intimidation threats are two different things. I've given you both the definition. Advocacy threat is when you are operating on behalf of the client, like wherein you are dealing for their litigations or third party disputes. But when it comes to intimidation threat, this is more like they are hampering you, saying that if you have excess dependence on that client for your audit fees, so majority of your audit fees is coming from one client, and that client is threatening you because they know that you are the sorry your basic earnings are from them, and if they threaten you like that, you possibly will start listening to them and give them the reports that they want. So there could be an intimidation. So both these are quite different, and which is why we got to take that into consideration here. Intimidation threats are when auditors are deterred, that is stopped from acting objectively, that is they're not letting you be unbiased. Then the next one they're talking about is a question on sampling, which is stratified sampling, wherein in stratified sampling, the conclusion drawn on each stratum, that is each part, is directly projected onto the whole population. Now, the very idea of doing stratified sampling, you know it, that because the population is heterogeneous, that is why we go for first stratifying it, that is dividing into subpopulations, and then we go for finding out a sample from each of those stratum. Now they're saying whatever results you get, you directly apply on the whole population. Definitely it's not going to work. The results of audit procedures applied to sample items within a stratum can be projected to that stratum, that piece of the subpopulation, not to the whole population. So simple point. To draw a conclusion on the entire population, the auditor will need to consider the risk of material misstatement in relation to whatever the other strata. So if you've broken the entire population into 4 lots, then you possibly have to take all 4 and then draw up the conclusion from there. Okay, so 5 questions which have had the answers is incorrect. Moving on to the 6th one here. Okay, this is a question from audit in computerized environment. With reference to general IT controls, the objective of a data center and network operations is to ensure that systems are developed, configured, and implemented to meet financial reporting objectives. Now, let me tell you one clue here. Even if you don't know what this particular thing is, data center is a place where you store the data. That's not about software development. Actually, there are only 4 heads. So, if you have given enough time to read those 4 headings, you know that system development, or SDLC as we call it, as system development life cycle, and even you read it in EIS, so you should have the idea about system development controls, which talk about developing, configuring, and implementing a system. Data center and network operation is to ensure that the systems are processed to meet financial reporting objectives, not developed and configured. So again, nothing much to explain. It's a straight one line explanation that tells you that whatever they gave there in the question is incorrect, and then you have to justify it with the answer. Okay, so 6 of them have become incorrect. Only one that you are seeing now is going to be the correct answer. And what is the question here? In the context of related parties, okay, we know that related parties is a significant risk area, no doubt. So in the context of related parties, the potential effects of inherent limitations on the auditor's ability to detect misstatements are greater. We know this because related party relationships may be hidden from the auditor. Management, if they didn't tell you, that is one sort of a story. But the more dangerous story is, what if management themselves are unaware? So, two possible reasons are there why all related party relationships have not been disclosed to you. Now, you may question me saying that, but sir, we take a written representation. Fine. You take a written representation. I'm not saying no, but there is still a possibility that management themselves are unaware, then what will you do? And not only that, if related party and your management are colluded and never a transaction like that comes out. So, yes, the possibility of fraud, which is a fraud risk factor, no doubt is higher in this context. So, therefore, irrespective of what controls you set up, inherent limitations are slightly higher in this particular story. Now, moving on to the last one of those here is the new point added in audit reports. Very clearly, I emphasize, even in the revision video that we did, I emphasized on this point so much because somehow I believe that this will come in true or false, and this happened to be here. Where can the auditor's responsibilities be given? Normally, many people think that the auditor's responsibilities should form part of the audit report itself. And now you have to be very clear that there are 3, not 1, 3 options. And yes, you can give it in the body of the report, or you can give it as an annexure, or you can give it as a website link where that entire responsibilities are available. So they are telling in the question that you have to always give it within the body of the report. Now, if it was the old standard, it used to say that auditor's responsibilities are to be given here. Now also many people prefer giving it in the body of the report, but from this question's perspective, they're saying only, always within. That is wrong. No, I have other options also. I can give it in the body, I can give it as an annexure or an appendix, or in fact, I can even give it as a reference to the website where all those details are aware of. Actually, if you see, no tricky questions in these 8. Like, there is no question where you didn't understand it only, or you had to read it twice to understand. I don't find anything of that sort. If you were well prepared with your basics and if your fundamentals were strong, I think this is pretty much a cakewalk, and 14 could be a very, very achievable game here. Let's move on to the questions aspect. Now, again, I don't want to dwell deeper into the answers. And even if something goes wrong here, please don't get disappointed and all that. Don't start calculating your marks and all. Just as I said, what should you have written versus what you wrote? It will only make you a better individual. And those of them who are watching it so that they are writing for the first time will have an idea. That is why I'm mentioning this again. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, once again I'll tell at the end of the video also. Don't take these things too seriously. But yes, at the end of the day you have to know, which is why we are putting this up. Let's go to the questions part right now. Question number 2 with a straight question as to what exactly should go into the documentation. This is from the planning aspect. Let's see the question there. The documentation of an audit plan is a record of nothing but the planned NTE of the risk assessment procedures and further audit procedures. So basically what you do in 315 and 330 at both overall financial statement level and assertion level, what all activities in planning phase should form part of the documentation. Now, to introduce what is documentation, you just have to say that it serves as a record for proper planning, a quick intro on what documentation is and why. Obviously, a record of the significant changes that took place to the overall audit strategy and audit plan, which were the two essential components of the planning. A point on that, not only you will anyway document the overall audit strategy and overall audit plan. Along with that, if there are any changes, the reasons to such changes should also be documented, plus a list of points, a summary of discussion that you had with your client or the key decision makers, documentation of the audit committee's pre-approval of what services are required, audit documentation, access letters, written representations, the other communications that you had with them, a copy of the entity's financial statements. Now you know the standard list of things that go into a documentation file, right? So if you know the content, you have all your marks. If you don't, then again, like I said, you have to work really on these kind of things. And then every time when we discuss this concept of sampling, before even we begin discussing about the types of sampling, before even we talk about what should you do in sampling, they're always giving you warnings about choosing the right sample. So straight question, few points here. They're asking you what are some of the precautions to be taken while applying test checking. So you have to understand that the sample that you pick up should be an ideal one, and normally whenever you pick up a sample, it doesn't become an ideal one just like that. You have to focus on a few points, understanding of the client, and what sort of operations they have, where are the major aspects. All these are some of the exclusive areas where you have to focus. So simple 8-point story: thorough study of the internal control or accounting systems. First 2 points, any time if you want to have proper knowledge of the client, these 2 points are common. Then from there, areas which are not suitable for sampling, unusual transactions which don't occur very often, non-recurring transactions, exceptional items, by whatever you call, no sampling in those areas. Okay, and whichever sampling method you're choosing, simple, random, stratified, random, basically your staff should be clearly explained about what it is, which method are you following. Transactions and balances have to be properly classified or stratified if they are heterogeneous. Sample size should be appropriately determined. Now that varies from client and the level of risk involved, all those factors. Samples should be chosen in an unbiased manner, and errors located in the sample, you know what to do when you find errors in the sample, you will project it onto the population, right? It's a standard question, guys, because in the chapter when we start discussing about standard number 530 on sampling, after they explain you what is the meaning of sampling and all, before even they discuss anything deeper into the topic, they will always tell you what precautions you are supposed to take. So that's a straight question. I think both these bits in question 2, 2a and 2b, have been very simple. Now let's move on to another bit from the same question, 2c. This time it's a question from the very first chapter, wherein we are talking about inherent limitations. In the case of certain subject matters, limitations on the auditor's ability to detect material misstatement are particularly significant. Explain some of them. Now, normally we talk about limitations with respect to time and cost, okay, and the fundamental way the how financial statements are prepared, the way audit is carried out, all those are anyway inherent limitation. But here in the question they're saying certain subject matters which make it even more difficult. So those residual category: fraud, related party relationships and transactions, non-compliance with laws and regulations, and future events and conditions that may cause the entity to cease being a going concern is also a point. If you guys have studied inherent limitations, this is again a straight arrow, nothing to worry there. Then let's just move on to the last bit of the second question. which is a question that talks about standard number 520 on analytical procedures. Whenever you find classic deviations in analytical procedures, now it's towards the end of that standard, the last paragraph, in fact, in that standard says you have to investigate. Now, in my class, also, I very clearly mentioned one point that we generally don't use the word investigate, but if exclusively we are using the word investigate, then it means that you have to dwell so deep. Why will you dwell so deep into that situation? Only because you have strong signals that a material misstatement may exist. So, question is, statutory auditor of ABC Limited, Mr. Raj, identifies certain inconsistencies while applying analytical procedures with reference to standard number 520, that one analytical procedures. How Raj shall investigate such differences? That's the question for you. If analytical procedures performed in accordance with 520 identify any fluctuations or relationships that are inconsistent, this is exactly the extract of the last paragraph from the standard. And I've always told you, why did such a deviation occur? You should always go and inquire the management. That is your first point. And then normally we dwell more deep. Dwell deeper is performing other audit procedures as necessary in the circumstances. Both of them will give you enough amount of audit evidence to either say that yes, inconsistency is present and it is material, or okay, inconsistency is because of so and so reason. As an auditor, you will get to know what that story is by the end of it. Okay, so this is what we have in the second question, which is worth another 14 marks, 4 bits probably. Again, nothing to be troubled about is what I can see there. Then let's move on to the third question. And some people will be there, for you what sir, you will tell everything is easy only. It's not like that. If something is genuinely striking to be a difficult question in the exam, I will definitely highlight that as, like maybe, yeah, this would have tested you. I think I did that in EASSM also, if you've already watched it. Wherever I feel that, in the exam, on a normal day everything will look easy, but in the exam what could have attracted your attention or what you could have missed, if something is there I will highlight. Simply I'm not here to sit and say everything is easy, right? Please don't judge like that. Moving on to question number 3. This one, yeah, is a question which is offbeat. Again, as I was just talking about, it came down. See, many people ignore the standard and go to the exam 560, which is on subsequent events. But I make sure that you always mark a couple of stars to the standard. Why? Many times questions have come from here asking you what is subsequent event. More than all that, they will generally test your understanding about the auditors, because this is happening after he gave the audit report. So it's kind of very serious. So let's see what question they have asked here. The auditor shall perform audit procedures designed to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence that all the events occurring between the date of financial statements and the date of audit report. Now this is post the date of financial statements and before you issue the audit report. Okay, which require any adjustment of or disclosure in. Now, normally it's not your duty to do any adjustment or disclosure, it is the duty of management. The question is, first of all, was there any event which required adjustment or disclosure? If there was any event which required adjustment or disclosure, did the management do it? This sort of a question is what we are trying to answer. Okay, so they are just asking with reference to 560 on subsequent event, what are the audit procedures to be done in auditor's risk assessment? Because no doubt this is a risk area. An event which required an adjustment or disclosure, but you didn't make that adjustment or disclosure, then obviously it's a classic case of misstatement, right? So which is why, as per 560, simple points, the auditor should always obtain an understanding of any procedures management has established. First of all, do they have? And then go ask the management, inquire the management. Go ask the management, did anything so seriously happen that which requires an adjustment or disclosure in the financial statement? No, sir, management is slightly, quiet in telling all this. Then don't wait for their signal. We have other ways to do it, right? Read the minutes of the meeting, anything that took place, any board meetings that took place after the financial year was over and before you giving the audit report. Read the minutes of such meetings between owners, management, TCWG, any of that. And if entity has prepared any interim financial statements mostly like listed companies and all might be obligated to do that. So if you are doing the audit probably sometime in July or something like that, June quarter financial statements would have been prepared, right? I'm just again taking this on a guess. So if you're doing audit in May or June, then the quarter is not done yet. So you would not prepare anything. If at all they have prepared any interim financial statements, because you have a lot of time to file income tax returns and ROC returns and all that. No. So maybe sometimes audit get extended to June, July, August. So in that time, if by then already Q1 of next year financial statements have been prepared, which is called interim financial statement, maybe you can take a look at those also. And if you identify something which either require adjustment or disclosure, then definitely you have to speak to the management and ask them that question. Today if I am able to identify this, why did you guys not identify this before? And if you have identified this before, it would have merited an adjustment or disclosure in the financial statement. Why did you not do it? So you just have to go there and see whether they have done it or not. If they have done it, very well. If they didn't, then request the management and TCWG do it. If they do it, very good. Perform additional audit procedures. If they don't, you will modify the audit report. But anyway, they didn't ask you all that in the question. They said, what are the risk assessment procedures you will perform? That's all. Moving on to the second question, CA Rohit is the auditor of Grace Limited, is designing a suitable confirmation request for a few debtors of Grace Limited. Okay, it's a question from 505 on positive and negative confirmation. If you guys have studied this, it will be a straight arrow. And again, we'd make sure that we mark a star to those 5 reasons. External confirmations, all the conditions present to use negative confirmation, and you know this line I emphasize very clearly. Only if all 5 are present, that is risk of misstatement is low, item contains a small amount, internal controls are effective. The straight question from 505, nothing to be troubled about over there. Moving to the next question, yeah, this one is a very simple one. I don't know why they asked this for an exam question, but yeah, it's just testing your presence of mind there. CAL is in the process of finalizing his risk assessment procedures of Effluent Limited, which include observation and inspection that may support inquiries, and discuss a few examples of the audit procedures where you include observation. Obviously, inventory will come to your mind when they say observation. Inspection is about the documents. So, inspection of records, counting of inventories, fixed asset deposit, receipt investigation, inspection of any charge document. I think you can give a lot of examples. I mean, like I said, it's not even an exam level question that has to be asked to trouble you. Let's see, the fourth one challenges you. I think this is a question which many of you might have ignored because many people don't study this chapter on audit in computerized environment. So if you know this, you'd obviously be able to do it. This is the last question in that chapter, which actually talks about while you are finalizing the report in this sort of a company, what report will you give? Just see if you will be able to recognize this. Otherwise, you can go to the last part of the chapter to find out this one. Force forceful limit, it is a company which is having spare parts, okay, or Force Limited, maybe the question has been printed. It's like Force Limited is a company and it's almost in all states in the country, and there's a financial year 2021. Company transferred its accounts from manual to computerized systems. All right. PQR and Co. Chartered Accountants having specialization in the system audit have been appointed as system auditors. Okay, the question is, what are those points, right? When you're finding certain exceptions in the IT environment, which needs to be assessed and reported, what should you consider, right? Nothing much to worry about, because the straight question, only 4 points are there that you have to actually consider. So if you have read this topic, you will get these. Only 5 questions are there in that chapter. So if you read that, you would have got it. If you haven't, then probably you might have to take a read on that one. Okay. Let's move on to question number 4, which is okay. I think this one they're talking about CAX, while conducting the audit of Joyful Limited, found a considerable increase in sales in previous year. He doubts that few fictitious sales have been recorded. Quite possible. Cut-off procedures. Okay, towards the end of the year, when you don't reach the requisite turnover levels, you'll add fake sales, right? This is the point. So to ensure that revenue is not overstated, what will you do? Check the process of generating sales invoices, whether a single sales invoice is recorded twice, or a cancelled sales invoice could also be recorded. Goods sold but cancelled, now again recorded. Fictitious customers being created. Any shipments are done without the consent agreement of the customer. Unearned revenue has been recorded. So all these are normally the points that you have to consider. So that's a question from chapter 9, wherein you're talking about audit of items in financial statement, where overstatement of sales is the question. If you've gone by a standard procedure, also you can write all these points. There need not be any by hearting required. Okay. Now, yeah, construction of an audit program. Question from chapter number 2 on audit planning. 4 points, always important. What are those? Not 4, actually 5. The number didn't get printed. So you can see all 5 points here. Stay within the scope and limitation. Don't go. I mean, like what the question is, you can see, what points should be kept in developing an audit program. So it's a straight question out of the chapter. See, many questions today are being asked in such a way that they're not really challenging the intellect. There are a few questions in the question paper where you have to read the whole question to understand what is it they're exactly trying to ask. Again, that also is not difficult, but only thing is you have to kind of see that and then answer. Which is like this question. They're asking you that points. If you have studied them, you will write straight away all the 5 points. You not bother about other content given, right? So see there. Stay within the scope and limitation. Determine the evidence which was available. Apply only those steps and procedures which are useful in accomplishing things. Consider all possibilities of error and coordinate the procedures to be applied to related items. So straight point. Now, yeah, next question is again a question that talks about obsolescence, and you will lose value in the asset. The value of intangible asset may diminish due to passage of time or use or obsolescence. The diminution of the value represents the cost to the entity for earning revenue during the period. Okay, we know that this is the normal concept. Discuss the audit procedures applied to ensure that intangible assets have been valued properly. Valuation of intangible assets, whether you have done amortization properly, verify the amortization method, are you choosing that right? So again, uh, the auditor should verify if the management has undertaken any impairment assessment to determine whether any intangible assets are impaired. If so, they have to be removed. Okay, so the next question is from section 138 on internal audit. Care Limited, which is having a paid up share capital of 50 crores, turnover of 180 crores. Whether Care Limited is required to appoint an internal auditor. Now you know the internal auditor provisions. Mandatory for every listed company, unlisted. Okay, they said it is a listed public company. So there is no discussion about 50 crore, 180 crore, and all that. Okay, so it's a mandatory for listed company, but what they're expecting you to write in the answer is this whole table. Okay, so if you are able to clearly mention the content and just conclude saying that yes, they are required to definitely appoint, because it's a listed company and the story gets done there itself. So such a straight question, but like I said, what they're expecting you to write is the entire criteria. Some people just say it's a listed company, so get it. You're not going to get your full marks. You got to quote the entire section 138, and then say okay. The next question is for cost records, but one point here that you have to understand is that they're saying that this company is engaged in generation for electricity for captive consumption. Now, this you will see this in one specific point where if the gross turnover exceeds, the gross turnover is 68 crores. So, if that is exceeding 35 crores, you have to maintain cost records. But for cost audit, rules do not apply to those companies which is an EOU, export oriented undertaking, and which is operating in special economic zone. And the third point is where generation of electricity for captive consumption is there, their cost audit will not apply. So if you have studied section 148 with proper care, everybody whose turnover crosses 35 crore, we got to take that into consideration. Only thing where cost audit is in picture, this is a point that you have to be highlighting it. Okay, next one is a very procedural question. Section 177 asking you to write about the responsibilities of an audit committee. Long list of points. I don't think I have to read it out. It's a question from 177 straight out of the book. So Companies Act questions I am not even interested, because we did so much of revision that I don't think anybody would have missed it out. There's any list out any three circumstances under which management or employees to commit fraud. Yeah, what is the incentive under which you commit financial obligation, pressure, unrealistic goals, or dissatisfied employees, lack of motivation, and even a name game. Okay, putting somebody else. And fifth one is opportunity to commit fraud. So all these are reasons for committing fraud. It's a straight question from the book. One very interesting question has come here. This one, which is again a procedural question, copy from the book only, but many people again ignoring aspect is there here. If you are giving a disclaimer of an opinion, what sort of a point will come? Now very clearly with the example I will explain in this one in class, that the auditor's description will change when it's about this. We have performed the audit in accordance with standards and all, you can't tell because you haven't performed, correct? So there is a definite change in the auditor's responsibility paragraph. That is what they're asking you. When the auditor disclaims opinion due to an inability to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence, he shall amend the description paragraph. Okay, many people think that only opinion is amended. No, there you have to change this. A statement that auditor's responsibility was to conduct an audit, and statement that however because the matters described in the basis paragraph you were unable to, right, you were unable to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence, and which is why first of all you are unable to conduct audit procedures, and which is why you are not able to gather evidence, and hence you are giving a disclaimer. That point has to be told, and we always followed our independence and ethical responsibilities. That also has to be told clearly. Okay, that's one extra point down there. Then moving on to define government audit and objectives. Straight question from the book. I don't think I have to read the answer for you. And then okay, this one here, please, question for merit. Your what points focus on audit of a VJM school educational institution? In fact, I didn't even give the entire answer. Preliminary points, revenue, expenditure, assets and liabilities. You have the format. In basically, they're asking you what point will you focus on audit of educational institution. Next item, they can ask you about hospital, cinema hall, club, anything. So I think you can go with that. Then LLP, couple of forms to be filed by LLP, Form 8 and Form 11. So, Form 11 versus Form 8, when will they be filed? Form 11 should be done 60 days, within 60 days of the completion of financial year. You don't wait for the accounts to be done and all that. But Form 8 should be done 30 days from the end of 6 months. Okay, so your financial year gets done on 31st March. This one, Form 11, should be done by 30th of May, while this one can be done 30 days from completion of September 30th. So 6 months are over, from there 30 days. So you have time till October. So those two forms are to be filed by like LLP. And they're asking you if audit engagement team discusses before the audit, when you are doing it in a bank exclusively. One question, like I said, this is a formality. Now I'd give you a serious tip here. Sixth one, if you think it's too theoretical, you can possibly kind of ignore that question as well, because instead of writing all that, the first 5 questions sounded more simple, and in exam if you want to save time, and if all bunch of questions are coming from government audit banks like this, then if you have not studied that, you could have left the sixth one in choice. But if you feel you can do justice to all those questions and write the answers, nothing stops you there. Okay, very very easy paper, guys. I don't find any, like I said, honestly speaking, I don't find anything which is very challenging. So somebody who had a decent baseline preparation could have done this paper with absolute ease. Now I have been told by people that MCQs were also pretty okay. So I hope that you guys, whoever is watching this, have also done everything well. And so just one last time. So this is the third time, like I told, don't take too many things to heart. If something has gone wrong, take it easy, no problem. And those of you watching this for the first time, having examined the upcoming attempt, it's better that you know what sort of question. Everything that you saw in this is there in your book. All you need to do is a solid round of preparation. These sort of paper discussions, RTP discussions, a full length 7-part revision series. In fact, it's 10-part, whole length. All videos are lined up in the playlist and kept. How past people who got 86 marks, their paper has been evaluated and that has been put. So spend all the time that you can now in your preparation stages, because later coming onto YouTube and watching everything will be a challenge. So those of you even who are writing the upcoming attempts, checking suggested answers and understanding, spending 30-40 minutes on that is never a loss of time. That one, how papers are being evaluated. Don't watch these videos towards the end. And many people watch preparation videos or a preparation strategy video towards the end. Okay, so I'm leaving the links of all relevant videos and the playlist in the description, so you might want to go there and check this out. I will see you soon, maybe live next time, and we'll come back and catch up with something interesting. For now, I'm signing off and I'll see you very soon. Thank you.